I'm Darrell Wallace, Manufacturing Technical Fellow at BlueForge Alliance, and I'm joined here today by Jennifer Herron, President of Action Engineering and also a known expert in model-based design and engineering, very active in the standards community and former chair of the ASME Y1446 subcommittee on product definition for additive manufacturing, so the current standard for product definition for additive. And we're talking today about model-based engineering and model-based design. And I guess if you could start, what is Action Engineering?
Sure. So Action Engineering is a company focused on 3D data transformation. That is everything from CAD models to manufacturing inspection technologies using 3D data. And we do that with a sense of intense understanding of the technologies, the standards, so you mentioned the standards, as well as the cultural adoption change pieces that are required to make transformation.
Model-based engineering, model-based design, MBE, MBD, you hear the words, what do they mean? What does that mean?
Yeah, model-based means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. The important thing about doing anything model-based engineering, definition, design, digital twin, all of those things. The important thing is to make sure that whatever the team is you're working on has a very clear understanding of what that is. But in general, it's using digital data in the manufacturing process, in the sustainment process, throughout the entire enterprise. And I think from everybody's perspective, that means different things to different people. So again, when we engage, with our clients, we're trying to really be clear about what that means and then stick to whatever words make sense to that group.
Sure.
Yeah.
So since it means different things to different people,
yeah.
How would you characterize the state of industry adoption of MBE?
Very difficult to ascertain is how I would characterize the current state of anything MBE. And I think people are struggling right now to get a handle on that, to identify where they are, where it is they want to go, and then what it is they need to do to get there. It seems pretty simple, but it's super difficult to do. And again, I think it's a very complex, big scope project.
That being the case, if I want to adopt MBD, MBE, where do I start? What do I need to do? What does that mean to adopt it?
Again, it's in the eye of the beholder. I think an executive look is going to have an impression of what that looks like. It's often going to be metrics. It's often going to be, how is my P&L adjusted? How do I get more money out of this process or whatever? So all focus on return on investment. For someone in the middle or kind of in the engineering, manufacturing engineering, quality engineering world, it's going to look like connecting all the little pieces together over their enterprise, and from an adoption perspective. From, if you're on the shop floor perspective, it's going to be about how does this technology not take away my job, and how does it make my job more fun, hopefully, and what does it do for me to increase the throughput so that I kind of give back to the bottom line of the company. So it's a spectrum. The adoption is totally a spectrum. We generally think about benefits or the return on investment metrics. We think about operational activities. What software tools do you need? What processes do you need to change? That's a big one. What processes do you need to change, and what are you going to retire? You got to put new processes in, you got to retire the old ones. Otherwise, it's just too much work for everyone. There's a bunch of leadership aspects around what it means to adopt it. And then there's a whole bunch of data that we have to get at and make the data that we have smarter. I mean, as the short story, which of course you and I do on the standards arena, trying to define what that means to make smarter data, to make digital data that can be consumed in different ways, both by humans and by machines. And there's a cultural aspect that gets in the way of all that adoption. And so those are kind of the 5 areas that we like to measure and assess and take a look at in the transformation process.
Okay. So we've talked about it kind of in the abstract, this process, these tools. What are some of these tools? I mean, how would somebody know that what are those tools?
I'll focus on an additive use case.
Okay.
It seems apropos, right? So there's going to be a CAD software, some kind of method to create geometry that defines the shape and takes it from, some engineer's brain or some person's brain into a physical representation in 3D, a visualization, if you will. So there's that geometric piece of it. Typically CAD softwares that we're talking about, would you like me to name some of them, or would you like me to be neutral and not name them?
So, but I think we could say that all the major solid modeling type CAD packages,
precisely,
right, include this.
Including, for additive, a whole slew of non-major CAD packages,
Sure.
which is actually kind of an important, interesting concept.
Yep, and there are certain formats to convey the information.
That's right.
And some of those would be?
So STL would be the common one, right? But then there's AMF. There's a slew of others. You probably know the better formats than I do. STEP is another format that would be commonly used to move things around. Those are boundary representation, data, interchange, interoperability standards that are internationally sanctioned by the United Nations, by the way, which is cool. We're also part of those ISO standards as well. So, so there's different formats, there's different software tools, and then there's a whole slew of tools that leverage that data in different ways depending on the manufacturing process, inspection process, if you're just visualizing it, if you're going out for procurement, if you want to send this out to a supplier for quoting. I mean, there's a whole litany, I think is the right word.
So is it safe to say that there are lots of standards, but there's not one standard, and they're not necessarily interchangeable cleanly?
Right.
So that certainly must be one of the challenges of implementation.
Yes.
You mentioned culture as being a challenge.
Yes.
Anything else that's a major barrier to adoption?
I think it's those two things combined is complexity.
Okay.
Technical complexity, data complexity, standards complexity, and then the people adoption, anything people involved. The people complexity. Yes. Remember how long we've talked about product definition data sets and how they, yes, it's a long time. It's a long time. Like years for the viewers watching, like years.
So how does this specifically impact small and medium manufacturers? Because we've talked many times about there are still lots of challenges around the adoption of GD&T. I mean, GD&T is not new by any stretch, and yet it's not universally understood or applied. Here we have these new approaches to communicating data. How does the small manufacturer decide if they need to, and how does it impact them?
They have a really hard time. I mean, is the short story. I think it's very difficult. The small manufacturers that we've worked with, and we work with small manufacturers, little tiny companies all the way up to companies with 100,000 people in them. We find the small manufacturers are very, very focused on their value and what the return on investment is for any particular scenario. So they're really good at immediately ferreting out what is good and what is bad, and what feels useful and what's not. So I think that's good. I think they're extremely underrepresented, and we're always pushing for larger organizations to focus on them first, or at least get a very strong understanding of what it is they're doing with the data, so that whatever you design them to give to them is what they need. Because I think we do a lot of ivory tower sort of pondering as engineers we know what we're doing. I don't have a tie on, but you do. We know what we're doing, but I think we don't, and then we waste a lot of time pontificating instead of talking to them specifically.
Well, so you mentioned trying to get the larger companies to work with the smaller companies.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the small companies. What are the challenges for large projects in implementation of MBD? Where does that fit into to large scope projects?
If that large complexity project starts sort of at the end game and says, okay, we're going to produce at these places, and says, what kind of information do you need? And then we kind of back out the analysis of what to feed them. I think that would be helpful. And so we have a couple of projects that we're working on that kind of a methodology to work, again, starting at the end game and then working backwards for what you really need. So the hopes there is that will be faster and less churny to get to something that's very valuable and useful for them.
Obviously, we're here at Rapid, and we're talking about additive manufacturing. Is there anything unique about how MBD fits within the scope of additive?
Yeah, it's so perfect. Well, my favorite quote is actually from Curtis Brown from Honeywell, and he's been in standards forever as well. And he says, well, additive manufacturing is the only manufacturing method that you have to have a 3D model for. So right off the bat, we're starting with something that we're going to go model only to start out with. Now, we're not really doing that. Half of the process is doing that, right? The manufacturing process, but the inspection process is a bit of an enigma to us right now, and the conformance, and how do we figure out how to comply, make the acceptance testing, make the qualification testing in 3D match up with what we put in 3D, because I'm pretty sure everybody's doing this still with drawings, and that feels inefficient to me. So lots of opportunity in that space.
So lots of challenges, lots of opportunities. Obviously, Action does a lot of this. Where can folks who want to learn more about MBE, MBD, where can they go to get some help? Obviously, they could come to you, but you're not the only resource, right?
Great, yes, and there's a huge community working on this. It's actually not, I guess it's huge to me because there's a lot of people. I mean, there's hundreds of people that we interact with on a regular basis. But that's across different standards communities, international, American-based, both of those together, SME, ASME, DMSC. So there's a lot of organizations from the standards community that's great to get involved with. We have training programs and advice around it as well. And one of my favorite things to do at a conference like this is, to find out what's going on with you, with other people, and making sure you're staying in tune with the way people are doing things and what software tools are available. Again, an event like this is a great way to go get demonstrations of the latest functionality and software tools. 3D interoperability is like my total obsession in life. So I'm always looking for how we connect across life cycle stages, the data structures.
So we have talked a little bit about how this evolution toward Industry 4.0 and model-based is potentially changing the value proposition from manufacturers, where you're not just delivering a part, but it's the data around that part that is part of what you're selling. Can you talk a little about how that fits into the overall landscape?
Yeah, there's a legal issue is the number one thing, I think. Yes, if I'm a big company and I have a supplier, I want all the data that you produce during that process, I want that back. Because if there's a failure in my system, I want to be able to go data mine everything at the tip of my fingers. I think conceptually that's very important, and everybody agrees with that until we go to pricing, until we go to quoting, until we go to the who owns this process and how am I going to give you value. A lot of the supply chain methodologies are about reducing part count, price per part, and sometimes that's in conflict with providing all the data and the feedback back. So I think there's in my mind, we have to have very difficult conversations outside of the technology that includes contracts and a different way of managing or interacting with the supply chain, where it's like this contract, conflict, legal ease handoff, because everybody gets really guarded and nervous. As we bring the people piece in there, and got to understand what threatens a business too, because I mean the motivation of a business is not going to be to give away everything and all their IP about how they manufactured their part. That's part of how they keep the part cost low, is to retain that information. So I think that's a really complex subject. We always talk about it and everybody goes, yeah, we don't know how to do that. And they run away screaming. So I think that's a big deal.
So it's part of what we have to work through.
It's part of what we have to work through, yeah.
So obviously at BlueForge here, we're very interested in how to support the Navy in their shipbuilding, particularly the submarine industrial base. I know you've had some conversations and have done some work with Navy. From your perspective, where do you see Navy specifically, or maybe DoD more generally? What's the state of the discussion around model-based, and where do you see that evolving?
Yeah. So all the way from the top, from OSD, right? Digital engineering strategies were released in 2018. We just did an update at the end of last year to kind of operationalize some of those and codify some of those concepts from 2018. So there's definitely a march ahead and a need for digital acquisition. It involves what I just said about the legal and the contract, and all those kinds of things are very, very important, and those details cannot be ignored early on in the shaping of a new program. So if you take a new system that you're developing within any DoD, it's really important to get a handle on the specificity of those manufacturing processes, the specificity of the technical data, because what you were doing 25 years ago with whatever drawing-based processes that you had are probably not efficient anymore.
Well, the good news for you is I don't think we're going to solve this today, which means you'll have plenty to work on in the years to come. And I thank you for taking time to talk with us here today.
Yeah,
any last wisdom to share?
No, it's fun. I'm excited to walk around and look at the examples. I'm getting distracted because there's like CAD over there. And so I'm going to check out new functionality and new software and new tools. And there's a giant dragon over there, so that's cool. Yeah, so that gets me excited. It's fun to check this out. So.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today.
You're welcome.
All right.
Thanks.